Okay. So I guess quickly, since this all started over Michael Brown and you've taken down your original Michael Brown video, how has your position changed on Michael Brown, if it's changed? So, it's not a loaded question.
Yeah, no, totally. So when I originally put that video up, what I do is I start to read my own feedback before, obviously, like your crew came in there, and I was getting a lot of negative feedback from people in my own community, which obviously wasn't something that I'm happy with. I try to listen to feedback when I'm doing anything, and then take that in and do what I can in terms of processing it. And then your video came out, which point by point was just basically going through the whole DOJ report. All the callouts are totally fair. I didn't go through the DOJ report. I do my streams basically every single day, and what I try to do is I'll be a Wikipedia Andy in the sense that Wikipedia will have a whole bunch of sources that you can quickly reference, but obviously I hadn't done enough research, so my position has changed in the sense that based on the DOJ report, I think, and based on the forensic evidence, because I did end up reading the whole 86-page report. Yes, it does show that Michael Brown isn't exactly a case that I would try to hold up as like an example of just an innocent person being shot indiscriminately.
When I first started to try to really get this channel going, I did daily videos. I'm sure people appreciated a video being released every day, but it's hard to do that much research or planning when you release one every day, which is why I stopped. If you want to accomplish something as ambitious as proving systemic racism exists or breaking down the Michael Brown shooting, you need to do actual research. Your audience isn't going to appreciate it if you say incorrect things and then make them look dumb. This reminds me of something that Mencius Moldbug says. You never want to fit into the negative frame that your political opponent has of you. The right is framed negatively as racist, Bible-thumping, anti-intellectual rednecks who deny science and are obsessed with guns and violence. Meanwhile, the left is framed negatively as wealthy, unpatriotic, censorious soy boys and hipsters who think with their bleeding hearts rather than their brains, which causes them to ignore threats and social problems. If you can be fitted into one of these frames, then you can be weaponized by the other side. There's a reason that everyone on YouTube responds to Vosh's videos, but no one responds to Kyle Kulinski. By starting the debate by admitting that he made a video based on feels not reals, TheSerf is stepping into a frame that a leftist should generally try and avoid.
That was neat. So I like first that she got atheism is unstoppable. I don't know if you tapped him on the shoulder or we're hoping that he would do a video on me. The one that TheSerf looks like an autistic Brendan Fraser, which I mean, I'll give you a little bit of a hint here that using that as pejorative doesn't really have power here, just because autistic people are pretty damn based. And,
I really look. That's the title of his stream, and that his whole channel has been erased off of the internet. I didn't use it as pejorative. I was just saying that this video existed. Meanwhile, by the time I uploaded it, that channel was already obliterated off the platform. But
sure.
This honestly baffled me. In general, you shouldn't insult people based on their innate appearance. It's not only rude, but it's absolutely cringe when done in a political context. However, Actual Justice Warrior isn't the one who said this. Someone else did. So why would TheSerf bring up an unflattering statement about his own appearance made by someone else?
The U.S. is the only nation where deadly force behavioral mandates are set by the Supreme Court as of 1989, which gave constitutional permissible use of force if reasonable perceived imminent threat and grave harm. By contrast, national standards in European countries conform to the European Convention on Human Rights, which permits deadly force only when it is absolutely necessary to achieve a lawful purpose. America's standards violate Europe's absolute necessity laws.
No, they don't. It's lawful for the police in the United States to shoot people who pose a threat to life of the officer or someone else. Such shootings would clearly be absolutely necessary to achieve a lawful purpose then. There's no contradiction here. Also, TheSerf doesn't understand how American law works. The US Supreme Court is responsible for defining the minimum standards of due process under the Constitution. This would include when police can use deadly force. However, states are free to set other standards through statute, through their own Supreme Courts, or through the police departments themselves.
Yeah. So in the US, only 8 states require verbal warnings when possible. Wall warning and leg shots are typically prohibited. In Finland and Norway, they require that police obtain permission from a superior officer before shooting anybody.
First of all, TheSerf is being dishonest here. It took me less than a minute to find a Finnish news outlet contradicting this factual claim. Rikander says that individual officers in Finland are given a good deal of autonomy in their decisions to use force in the line of duty. If it is possible, the senior officer on duty should decide on whether the use of firearms is necessary. I'd imagine that if it is possible, most police departments would instruct their officers to seek guidance from a sergeant on scene before taking the shot. This scenario is depicted all the time in American movies and television shows.
This is Eagle 1. Target is in position.
There is a receiver on your vest. If he shoots it out, it disables the trigger. Get out of there right now.
Come on.
You got a shot?
Eagle, are you green or red? Green.
Take the shot!
Centralized training centers keep police accountable. As well, and police in the Netherlands, Norway, and Finland require a 3-year national training academy compared to 19 weeks in classrooms in the US.
This also appears to be a misrepresentation of reality. I looked up the Finnish Police University website using Google Translation. Finnish officers are put into the field as constables after 1.5 years of academic study. Now, TheSerf could say that that's still better than many US police departments. While I would agree, I doubt that the additional classroom training that Finnish police receive helps them out in the field decide whether or not to take a shot.
The other big point about this is the militarization of the American police force, which is almost unique to America at the degrees in which it's done. Data from the Washington Post shows that there's almost double the amount of civilian deaths if you can attribute it to the accelerated use of military equipment as well.
The complaints about the militarization of police are stupid. Yes, police use things like this when they go out on search warrants or deploy the SWAT team. Do the police look badass using these? Yes. Are they necessary? Probably not the vast majority of time. Maybe yes though when responding to riots. Do these things kill people? No. I could understand why a libertarian may complain about the police using taxpayer money to buy too many of these types of things, but that's not related to police shootings.
Right, but so we're going to have to look at aggregate information for all of this, because you're going to talk about little teeny microcosms, especially isolated examples. We could just cherry pick data over and over and over. We're going to be stuck in the weeds forever. So I think the best thing to do here is to look at the larger broad scope.
TheSerf's a hypocrite. He criticizes Actual Justice Warrior for bringing up the fact that some specific police departments actually do require a lot of training and education, because Actual Justice Warrior doesn't average the data across the whole of the United States. Yet all of the data that he brings up is cherry-picked from a select few Nordic countries. Countries that are mostly racially and culturally homogenous, where people don't have guns.
Things, including police training. And again, the fact that it's you use the majority of training in the US is concentrated towards the use of force rather than conflict de-escalation.
If criminals rarely have guns and instead arm themselves most often with knives or edged weapons, it makes sense for police departments to focus training on de-escalation. If criminals are most often armed with guns though, officers are going to often be in situations where they need to make a split-second decision because de-escalation is not going to be an option. Therefore, it makes sense for departments to heavily focus on the use of force.
Right, so here's the next part. It requires 3 years of national training academy in most other countries in Europe. So the Netherlands, Norway, Finland,
Except it doesn't.
It's 19 weeks of classroom instruction on average in every single state in the US. It's 3 years in these countries.
Okay.
Well, that could also show you a greater reason why there's a huge discrepancy in the use of force and how.
I mean, if you want to spend more on police training and you want to like hyper fund the police in the United States, then all right, like let's fund them more.
So you can throw that one out there.
Right. What exactly is the point of this debate? I thought the left wanted to defund the police. If you want to spend more money on training them instead, as a conservative, I have no objection to that.
Yeah, I'm not a crime denialist. It's like, I know you're trying to pull the 1350 over me on this one. I will agree that they do commit a disproportionately high amount of crime.
That's a homicide stat. I was talking about overall violent crime.
Right. So overall violent crime, yes, they commit more crime than white people.
Isn't it funny how all of the people who want you to believe in systemic racism are the first ones to admit that black people commit substantially more violent crimes? Imagine if I told you that I believed the food inspector's office was systemically racist against Chinese restaurants. I then conceded that Chinese restaurants disproportionately violate food safety rules. However, I take issue with a number of minor details or related statistics having to do with aspects of these inspections. You'd think that I was some sort of crazy person.
Like, yeah, I'm not saying that there's a hard line between black, white, Asian, South Asian or whatever.
What I'm saying is those things don't actually exist. They were invented by the white race in order to characterize people into different classifications. But if you talk about, say, black people, right, what we're actually talking about is demographics. We're talking about different clusters of human beings, because at the end of the day, it's all just of humanity, right? So it's just different human beings in different areas.
Is race a made-up social construct? Absolutely not. Have there been any scientifically proven racial differences? Yes. Does that mean race is real? Yes. Can anything science has told us about racial differences help solve political or social problems? No. There have been very few studies on this and very few racial differences that have been established. What I can say is the process of natural selection continued after racial groups separated. For example, in Europe, people were selected for their ability to digest dairy. This means Europeans as a race can digest milk much better than other races of people. In Africa, natural selection selected blacks with blood cells shaped like sickles. This makes black people more resistant to malaria and more susceptible to other types of disease. If you look at the tropical parts of Africa where blacks would have been able to grow their tropical crops, they mostly correspond with people having sickle cells. So it's ridiculous to say that race is a made-up social construct and that there are no racial differences. These are two examples, but if it weren't such a taboo subject for academics to study, we'd probably be aware of many other racial differences. I bring this up not because I have any evidence that crime is racially based. I don't believe any serious academic study has sought to test this. Instead, I bring it up because the burden of proof is on TheSerf. He's the one alleging the existence of a racist conspiracy in the US criminal justice system. That means he's obligated to prove his own argument. If he can't establish crime rate is not affected by aspects of one's race, he's failed to meet his burden of proof.
So if you want to tell me something like, hey, well then Lance, how does a certain group have sickle cell anemia? What you're actually talking about is people from certain areas of sub-Saharan Africa that happen to have that. But it doesn't mean that it's a trait that's attributable to one classification of race.
So wait, he does know about the sickle cells? It's not just an isolated region of West Africa that has this trait. It's present in most of the tropical regions of Africa. Blacks in the tropical versus non-tropical parts of Africa would not have likely migrated into each other's regions very often, given the fact that their crops and livestock would not have been cross-compatible. If races are largely isolated from each other, which is what happened in world history, then racial differences would be possible across entire races of people. Once again, lactose tolerance is a broadly European trait. It's not something that was limited to a specific part of Europe.
Right. But again, so if there's no such thing as race, then we should be looking at why that is happening to a certain amount of people in a certain group. It's like you said, it's nothing innate, so there's nothing intrinsic to them that is causing that. So there has to be socioeconomic reasons why that's occurring, correct?
That's simply incorrect. Race is clearly real to black people. They make an awfully big deal about it if you change the Black Lives Matter to All Lives Matter. A woman was recently shot for making that mistake. If race is real to black people, then such disparities could also be caused by disparities in black culture. Socioeconomics is not the only possible explanation.
So I can pull out the actual facts on this. This comes from the Department of Justice report on Ferguson, the second Department of Justice report that you refused to bring up again, by the way. So this
you're talking about the ticketing practices. If you want to know my position on ticketing practices, yes, you send police officers to certain areas based on their higher rates of violent crime. As a negative consequence of that, you tend to write more tickets because you see more of that activity just based on your overall presence.
A veteran police officer is capable of profiling cars and can produce a high frequency of felony arrests as a result. Assuming that police officers are being deployed efficiently, which is probably not always the case, you're going to have veteran officers put in high crime areas, and they aren't going to be writing any tickets because it wastes them as a resource. The Ferguson Review was launched by Obama's Justice Department. I'd consider it to be tainted with partisan bias. Even putting it aside, its main conclusion was that the city of Ferguson put too much weight into generating revenue from policing. By doing so, it found that it disproportionately affected blacks, which is not all that surprising given that Ferguson is over 60% black and blacks commit more crime. This study had absolutely nothing to do with how the city of Ferguson approached dealing with the issue of serious violent crimes.
Yeah, but unfortunately for black people, they get very unlucky. Like 85% of vehicle stops, 90% of citations, 93% of arrests, despite comprising 67% of the population of Ferguson. They're twice as likely than whites to be searched for traffic stops, even though they're 26% less likely to be in possession of illegal drugs or weapons.
Yeah.
Like, when you see all that, you must say to yourself, well, there has to be a racial bias to this.
If blacks commit more crimes, they're more likely to have warrants out for their arrest. That also means they're more likely to be stopped and searched by police. If there are more police in black neighborhoods because of higher rates of crime, that's also a reason for more stops. Also, like I suggested earlier, experienced police officers will likely profile the cars that they think will likely result in felony arrest. When a car that they've profiled commits a minor traffic violation, it will then be stopped by the police. If blacks commit more crimes or drive cars similar to people who commit more crimes, they'll be stopped more often for reasons that have nothing to do with racial bias.
They were proved to be 26% less likely to be in possession of illegal drugs or weapons, despite the fact that they were twice as likely to be stopped in the same areas.
Yeah, but again, due to 1350, which you conceded at the beginning of this debate, blacks commit more crime. That means blacks are substantially more likely to be on probation or have warrants out for their arrest. This means that they would be subject to searches more often. During a traffic stop, police aren't going to search someone or their car who doesn't have a warrant out for their arrest. However, if there is contraband in plain view, the police do have grounds both to arrest someone and to search the car. Given that white people commit significantly less crime than blacks, I would assume they are searched far more often for having contraband in plain view than for having warrants out for their arrest. Therefore, the statistics would inevitably reflect the fact that police more often find drugs when searching whites.
Uh-huh.
You just dismiss that as if it's fine. You're like, yeah. But I mean, ultimately, we're getting the goals we want, right?
What do you mean?
Black people facing similar low-level charges as white people were 68% less likely to see those charges dismissed in court. That's the other big problem.
The most common reason that a case is going to be dismissed is because someone completes a diversion program. Diversion programs aren't offered to people who have prior convictions, though. If blacks commit more crimes, as TheSerf acknowledges that they do, they'd have their cases dismissed far less often.
This was the same for other cities like Chicago. And the same thing with that UCLA Harvard study that we were talking about earlier. The same thing happens in Portland. The same thing happens in Boston. The same thing happens in Oakland.
Isn't it remarkable that when one group commits the most amount of crime for largely cultural reason, that same group finds itself being pulled over and searched more often by the police? Finding that the same thing happens in different parts of the country doesn't prove the existence of systemic racism. Well, I'm going to cut off this video right here. This will be a part 1 debate review. Don't worry, there'll be a part 2 coming. If you like this video and you're not already subscribed to my YouTube channel, please support small YouTube channels like mine by subscribing. Thanks.
Based. And I know a lot of autistic people who wear that as a badge of honor, almost like it's a superpower. You may have met one of them. That would probably be Vosh. And I think that, like, you know, you wouldn't really question whether or not he has an ability to have an intellectual conversation.
I would definitely 100%.